All right, I think we're good. It's weird because these hangout things, they never exactly know when it's online. So it's always an awkward
Uh,
start. Like, oh my gosh, what's happened? All right. So imagine you have millions of people tuning in right now to our live stream. What do you want to tell them?
I guess what we just talked about, something interesting like cutting my own hair.
All right, let's do that.
I don't have that much to say. I guess I'm lazy, but then I'm also not lazy. I mean, this goes into like the whole thing where like programmers say that being lazy is good because then it's not really being lazy, but like you're willing to do all this work so that you don't have to do something else.
Yeah, no, you do way too much work because of that. You can be lazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I just like I can just use the buzzer and then it's not that hard.
No, because you don't have any variation. You just go one, one. Oh, that's
Well,
fairly.
I did like I think I did like 3, 2, 1 like from here, and then on the top I did like 6, so it's a little bit higher on top.
How did you do the like transitions then, like the boundaries between the different ones?
Uh, I just had to guess. I don't think it's like that. I mean, it's kind of funny because you go in there and then people are like, "Oh, you got a haircut." I was like, "Yeah," and then it looks good. So you don't say anything, and then later like, "Oh, I did." Like, whoa, what? Okay.
Yeah, well, because like I mean, most as long as it doesn't look terrible, right? I mean, it's probably
Yeah.
not a professionally styled. But the thing is, like, if you go out to get a haircut somewhere random, it's not that good either, right?
I guess.
Like, I've never had a satisfactory haircut just because I just go to like Supercuts or whatever down the street, and it's like pretty generic, right? They just basically do the equivalent of that, and like,
Right.
yeah, I'm sure there are really good haircut places, but I've never. And like at school, like when I was in Boston, like I think my friends and I, we would always just make fun of each other whenever we got haircuts because it was so bad, right? It was like the
Yeah,
whatever school haircutting people. It was always terrible, like lopsided. We have to wear a hat, but like that
right.
was like a rite of passage.
Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, I never really went to get a haircut. My parents would do it. And so I guess I was like, oh, maybe I should just do it too then. So
Yeah, it was a Asian bowl cut style.
yeah, I didn't like that, but
Yeah, my parents actually cut my hair. My dad cut my hair, and he actually knew how to cut hair, kind
Hmm,
of, because he practiced on his like brother when he was younger a lot.
right,
So
right.
he got lots of years of practice. But he actually did cut my hair, and then my mom actually cut it a decent amount as well. And then I remember I told them because like it was like I don't know $10 back then or whatever to get a haircut, and I told my parents I said. Whenever you cut my hair, you should pay me $10 because I saved you $10.
Oh, because they're gonna. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Okay,
like I saved them $10, so like they should
right,
pay me for cutting
right,
my
right.
hair.
Wow, that's amazing. I never thought of
I don't
that.
think that actually worked, but I think they tell that story. But
That's
yeah, I mean, talk about the programmers being lazy angle. I mean, I think this is a common refrain from programmers, but for people who are not programmers, they might not understand that refrain.
yeah. I'm not sure. I think it came from like. I mean, I'm sure it came from a lot of things. I think I remember hearing about it from like Larry Wall. I think he made Perl, and he talked about like 3 different, um, I guess, attributes of a good programmer. I forgot what they were, but it was like one was like pride or something, and like, uh, yeah, I forgot exactly. I have to look it up. But well, yeah, one of them was being lazy, and I guess it's just trying to be funny in that it doesn't mean you're not doing any work. It's just like you're so unwilling to do like I guess work that you would do a lot or manual work, and you would rather spend a lot of time making the automated solution. I think there's like an XKCD about that too, right? Like there's
Probably,
like
yeah.
takes like 6 months to find out the automated solution, but then it's like, oh, you could have did that manually in an hour or something.
Yeah, and I think that like the discipline as you become more experienced is to recognize when, all right, it's good to go yak shaving and come up with the most general great solution. But if you're only going to run this code once,
Right.
just like write something crappy or just do it manually, right? So one good example is actually I just went through this with my TAs, entering in grades at the end of the term, right? So like
Oh,
what is the trade-off point by which there's some crappy web interface at every school you enter in grades. You can either manually do it, right? You have some spreadsheet and you manually just go and check off all the boxes or enter in all the fill down boxes, or
right.
there's some import from spreadsheet solution that's always some weird thing where they give you this weirdly formatted spreadsheet and you need to write some script to merge it with your own spreadsheet and kind of double check it. And it's like, so yeah, how, if the class is 20 people, just do it manually once.
Right.
It's fine. Right? But if it's like 500, yeah, you probably want to write a script and sort of reuse it because you don't want to manually check 500 things. So it's like, yeah, it's exactly like the sort of trade-off. That's, yeah.
I think that's something, yeah, especially if you're not, even if you're not doing programming as your job, maybe it's even more so like that, right? It's like in your job, you're doing things all the time that are manual, but maybe there are opportunities for you to like write some kind of, bookmarklet or something that automates, which would be pretty good use of like learning some programming.
Yeah, and especially if other people can use it, right? I mean, so like there's all these, in business or whatever, all these Excel macros that people write. And it's like if you
Right.
don't know how to do it, you're literally paying people however many dollars an hour to go and manually check boxes and enter in numbers, right? Where if somebody in your company, because it's so domain specific, right? We need some
Right.
kind of weird workflow where we need to put numbers from here to here. If one person just has the knowledge to write some macro or a plugin for Excel and everyone installs it, you're saving everybody a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of time. Yeah.
And maybe it's also cool because a lot of it is like kind of a one-off. You don't. It's not like other code where you have to maintain it over time. You don't need tests. Like you just run it and then it works. So that's like also more fun than what most people would think is programming. So
Yeah. I mean, there's this whole long tail of thinking about, one way to think about this is how many, it's like number of lines of code times how much that code runs, right? There's so much code for which it's small number of lines and it doesn't run that often. So like it's no one's made a library for it. No one made something. It's all very one off and it's like just customized enough for your use case. But if it saves you a bunch of time, it's worthwhile doing. And it's also why it's like hard to fully automate everything with GUIs or with everything because like no one's gonna make a special
yeah.
feature in Excel for your weird use case. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That is hard balance. Not sure.
Yeah, because most software most people write are not going to be run that often and not going to be that generally useful, right? That we always think about the software that's really useful and that everyone runs, and there are great libraries and all these things for it. But yeah, so that's kind of how we got from haircut to here. I mean, what other things are on your mind besides your haircut?
I mean, I guess we can talk about like the other side. So if you write one-off programs, and then there's the opposite, which are like programs you want to maintain for years or potentially really long time. Yeah, I guess what does it mean to do? I don't know. It's funny, like when you write, I feel like a lot of things, it's kind of like once you're done, you're done. So like we write a book, it's over. You might write a sequel or like a movie and other kinds of art. But with programming, it's like it could potentially be there forever, even if you're not even the one writing it anymore.
Yep. Yeah, no one is asking for pull requests for movie scripts or but I mean, people do fan fiction, right? I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like people would do offshoots and remix. This is the whole thing about open access and copyright, right? Like encouraging Harry Potter fan fiction, right? People do write Harry Potter or Star Wars fan fiction,
Right.
but it's an interesting balance because they can do that and that's great, but it's not like they're bugging the original writers to modify Harry Potter.
Yeah, exactly. That is interesting. And then also like some of the differences are like with a lot of the books or art, it's like there's one author, right? So it's like it can be done, and then there's only one person that originally made it. But then with open source, it's like maybe one person started it and they had a small sense of like what it could be, but it turns into something where like hundreds of people are working on it, and then it doesn't end and it lasts beyond the first person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique thing. I mean, can you imagine other domains that are like that? I mean, like open source software. I'm trying to think of other examples. I mean, what would be the closest analogy to that people would understand who's not in software?
I guess only like something basically the same, like Wikipedia, right? That's like,
Yeah.
I don't know what other things are like that.
Yeah, it's a really unique thing. And that's why it's something that's hard to explain to people who are not in software, right? That this idea that there's all this stuff that people don't want to pay for and that they rely on, and that, like, just even talking about, like, if you just step through the modern, let's say web development workflow with the npm ecosystem. Like it just sounds absurd to people that you have all these dependencies that aren't statically bound together, and like
Mm,
you go back to your code base, in a year, and you do npm install on another computer, and some stuff just doesn't work just because like
right.
you forgot to lock the version of something, or like someone upgraded a minor version, but they actually introduced a breaking change because no one prevents you from doing that. Right? It's like
Right.
so many things are so weird and loose, and like it's like you don't want your car working that way, right? Like and
Yeah.
other things working that way.
I mean, there are some small changes. I mean, not small, small and big, like having lock files and
Yep.
making that more of a default. Like that's definitely changed over the years. So like, but that doesn't mean everyone's doing that, and that's true. Like not everyone knows about it or uses it.
Yep.
It's funny thinking about like how another thing I'm thinking about is like as a maintainer, how do you kind of in a sense spread the message or whatever? It's like not even just like you add a feature and it changes everything. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to know about it or use it.
Yep. Yeah, man, I just learned about the package lock JSON thing
Mm.
recently because like I set up my development environment for my Python tutor. I do it once every like 2 years just because I
Yeah.
have some computer. I set it up, it all worked. I like don't mess with it. And then I have to like get a new laptop because mine broke. And I'm like, oh my God, nothing works. And then I have to be like, oh, what is this like? You have to upgrade Webpack and
Yeah.
like lock files. And they say, I'm like, all right, I'm like scratching my head. And like, I'm like, yeah, things are probably better because of that, but I had to get over this hump to upgrade. I kind of joke that like every time I update something, like my documentation will have to change if like, getting started how to set up,
Mm.
just because like something changes, right? And like TypeScript's another example of
Right.
like how they do the the external modules for. I mean, I've used TypeScript since the beginning, and like the modules files, it was some repository, right? Then they used some other repositories. Like, oh, this is deprecated, you should use this other repository. And then
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like the kind of old school C programmers back in the day when you just statically linked all your libraries into this one binary, and you can just
Right.
put it in anybody's machine and just run it. It's like so different.
Yeah. And even with TypeScript or a lot of other packages, it's like they might not use Semver in the same way as you might expect. And even if people do, it's hard to like do that correctly.
Yep.
And also, especially if you work on something like TypeScript or Babel, it's like a bug in the compiler is a breaking change. And
Yeah.
so like I've introduced patches where I'm like, oh, let's fix this behavior, but someone relied on it, of course, and then we had to revert even though it was like,
Oh,
okay.
they were relying on undefined behavior or bad behavior, like a buggy behavior that everyone was relying on. And if you
Yeah.
fix the bug to make it into the spec, yeah, there was a ton of these stories. I have colleagues who were compiler hackers. I mean, back, doing stuff with GCC and LLVM,
Mm.
and it's like, yeah, it's like a known. I mean, also like Microsoft had these, great blog posts by people like in their Microsoft, both in their C and C++ compiler, and also in like just Windows, right? I mean, Windows is a great example. Like, there's all this compat stuff where like
Yeah.
new versions of Windows, they literally have like if the binary looks like Adobe Photoshop or Autodesk or some of these big clients of theirs, we have to do some weird hack to emulate the old version of Windows because
Wow.
we want to make sure Adobe products keep working. And it's because, they're a big client of ours, and throughout the years, so I'm sure if you look at the Windows code base, there's a lot of this, cruft of like, if the binary looks like Adobe Photoshop
Mm.
version 3, do
Right.
this weird thing in the operating system or undo this thing because it expected the memory to look this way from Windows 98 because it was some bug.
Right. Well, I totally now I remember that because I remember being on Windows and then you would download some program and you have to like pick like, oh, let's try it in Windows 98 version.
Yeah,
Maybe it
yeah.
works. That's
Yeah,
fun.
I mean that was like back in the day, yeah. But like yeah, but I think that for this it's like for the really big clients, right? For Adobe or for like I don't know, whatever big software, they actually hard code that into the OS because they want to make sure it works for everyone out of the box. And it's
Right.
like just the realities of maintaining. So I mean, this is we can talk about this is like we had this is a great Joel Spolsky article. This is a long time ago because I'm old. About how Netscape rewrote their entire code base, right, in 4.0, whatever. This is like the late 90s. And he was saying how this was a big case study of what not to do, right? It's like the code base was getting crufty. It was really getting kind of all sorts of warts, and people were like, oh, I want to start from scratch. And that kind of how they lost a lot of time, right, just from rewriting. And he, the thing that stood out for me, I mean, having maintained my Python tutors, it's almost been 10 years, and like, is that, those weird things in your code, that's because someone found a bug or found an edge case or had a test for it. Yes, you want it to be as elegant as possible to fix
Right.
something elegantly, but a lot of times the real world isn't elegant. So there are going to be weird, crufty things in the code. And like, if you see someone's code and it's so pristine, it's because it's never actually been used.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, totally. I guess it's the same thing with browsers and like everyone having to if IE this and all that stuff. And in Babel, it's the same thing. Like every single possible edge case or what kind of syntax you write, and then there are other alternatives and they're really fast. But it's because either no one's using it or it's just it only does a subset of what it needs, right?
Yeah, it's a and that's what these tools like Babel or browsers or any kind of abstraction layer, that's why it's so powerful, right? I mean, jQuery was like this back in the day,
Yeah,
right? That they did, they did all of this hard work of every single edge case so that it can provide a nice abstraction so that the user of it just write whatever they think is sensible and it'll work. I mean, browsers are a great poster child for this, right? Of like, people
yeah,
write all sorts of broken HTML all the time. And if browsers didn't have such a great lenient parser for HTML, most of the web just wouldn't work, right? I remember back in the day, like, this is like 10, 15 years ago, where people were really pushing this XHTML thing, where it's like, you should write your HTML that looks like legal XML that's perfectly validatable by the machine, and like, so that machines can process it and semantics and whatever. But like, no one actually did that because it was so hard to write code that was just so good. And even if you're using a GUI to generate the code, it might not always generate conformant code. So because the browser is so lenient, that's how we have this explosion of all this great content on the web. I'm sure most web pages don't validate. Right?
yeah. And I guess this has a lot to do with like the whole like how the committee wants there to be one JavaScript, and so they didn't want to add like multiple modes other than strict mode. And then like the whole smoosh thing that happened too. It's like the same thing. It's like you shouldn't like I don't know. It's like people want it to be the most spec thing possible, but it enables different changes. And then this is probably why everyone hates JavaScript, but this is also why JavaScript what it is today too, right?
Yeah, it's a great case study of like, and also just, just the language design itself. I mean, Perl was like this back in the day, but, JavaScript had the web platform, is that it was tolerant of a lot of sloppy code, right? I mean, because, and that's, in the 90s when I was coming up and stuff, like, if you had to write, Haskell like code in order to get something on the web, no one would do it because it was just so hard to get anything conformant. But like all sorts of sloppy, especially in the older days, JavaScript went through and it kind of worked, and sometimes it didn't work and it was buggy, but that was how people made these GeoCities pages and just
Yeah.
really charming old pages, because you could be a crappy developer and write HTML and JavaScript. And there's an argument, this is an orthogonal issue, but like, some of the, so this guy Dave Weiner, I think, like, he wrote this thing about HTTPS, about how, he's this old school blogger. I think he like did a lot of these old blogs, and he was saying how, because Google is now really trying to push everybody to upgrade HTTPS, they're issuing warnings in Chrome and like
Right.
all this other stuff. And his argument was, there is a lot of long tail websites out there that are not maintained at all. They're maintained by hobbyists. They're old university sites. They're just crappy things that are on the internet. And if you push that out and people can't access it as easily, then you're losing a lot of that charm of the early web. And the early, I mean, it's like that balance between letting everyone just create stuff, even kind of crappily, and also making it secure and conformant and stuff, yeah. I mean, and even this is going, I'm like really dating myself, but when the web started, there were different models of hypertext back in the 80s. People were exploring, and one of the things with Tim Berners-Lee and the web was this idea that links could be one way, right? Same thing with Twitter, right? That followers were one way, whereas in Facebook or other social networks, you had to be bi-directional, right? If you follow someone, they had to approve you. And in the old days, and it's a lot of the web, hypertext sort of platforms, the links had to be bi-directional because they wanted to be trustworthy, right? It's like if you want to link to someone else, it needs to, both parties need to approve the link somehow, and that just made it so it can't grow. And the, you know, the incarnation of the web that grew was because anyone can link to anyone. Like you don't have to get anyone's permission to send a link to them. Yeah, if you say something terrible about them and link to it, whatever, we'll just let it be, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it leads to a lot of this open growth. So I mean, I guess we can bring it back to the JavaScript Babel thing, but like anything that just seems to, you know, these, any kind of these systems that succeed, it's almost like by definition they have to allow for this leniency and this messiness, because if you have this really clean slate system, they've never actually succeeded, it seems. Right?
Yeah, it's just hard because it's like, that's already hard in itself, but then once you put in like having limited people and then limited time and limited funds and all that stuff, then it gets like really interesting. Yeah, it's like kind of, and even it goes beyond, like because we were talking about platform, it goes beyond the project itself. It goes into like the language and the ecosystem and the like npm, like the fact that like X% of all packages on JavaScript, they're all using Babel or whatever. It's like the decisions that we're making are affecting all of those things, and it's hard to know that whether that's right or not. No one's telling you what to do. No one cares really. You kind of just like,
well, they care when it breaks, right? They care when it breaks.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say that. Yeah.
It's like it's like no one is pushing towards something, or people have all sorts of different goals they're pushing, pulling you toward, and then everyone will get mad no matter what.
Right, and so you have to be in this position where everything you do seems wrong, and then the problem here is that you're working from like a state of, which I kind of like, I'm feeling now is like I'm working from a state of like fear, versus working from a state of like this is like a direction, or this is like good. It's just kind of like you're scared of doing anything, and then that you get to paralysis. This goes into like the fact that we're trying to release version 7. And we haven't. It's been over a year. Just like a lot of projects, whether it's Webpack or Bootstrap, it took like years for something to happen because either you lost direction, or you're scared of moving in a direction, or the feature creep. All those, plenty of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the price of success in a way. So, you know, what do you think is necessary to overcome that, you know, in your mind?
Yeah, I'm literally dealing with it, so I guess it's funny to be in the position right now. I don't know. I feel like it could be a lot of things. It's kind of, you know, yeah, maybe it is a lot of things. It's like getting more people involved, but then maybe that means that you're spending more time trying to onboard them, so you can't really do that. And then it's like maybe you gotta just focus on, you know, shipping it, and then everyone's getting distracted by, you know, the daily maintenance of like, you know, checking whether it's Twitter or GitHub or Slack or all these things. Each of those is a context switch. You have to talk with them for 30 minutes. They don't really know what they're saying, and it has nothing to do with releasing the project. They are not that, you know, like grateful for what you're doing anyway. And at the end of the day, you're like, what did I do? You know,
yeah.
like, I didn't do anything.
You're just fighting fires all day, or, you know, checking off boxes. Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, it's like yeah, I don't know. It's just amazing to me that these things actually work, right?
Yeah, and then you look back, you're like, how does this even work at all? You're like, how do we even last this far? And maybe it's because there's an inevitable kind of like it's just going downhill until it kind of gets to this point where like either people decide I don't want to do this anymore and they burn out, or I just want to leave this project because I just can't deal with this kind of thing anymore, or you decide I'm going to ignore everyone and just focus on it. And maybe that's the best thing to do, because otherwise they're like, just from a quantitative point of view, if you're spending like none of your time working on it, then it's just not gonna, it's just, why when everyone asks me, they're like, oh, when's Babel 7 coming out? Everyone's like nice about it. And every month I'm like, okay, next month. And it's been like that for like forever. Yeah.
It's a hard thing.
And you don't want to be like, another thing is I don't want to go publicly and be like, oh, like I'm complaining or like sad or like whatever, and that's not helping either. Even though that's exactly what you want to do in that situation, but that won't help either. Like people saying, oh, that's too bad or whatever. Like no one, it's like a pretty bad situation to be in.
Well,
But
it's interesting because the people who are in these positions are not. A lot of times you didn't ask to be in this position, right? It's like it's not like you were from day one. You're like, I want to be an online community leader of something that millions of people use and be a public figure, right? And like a
right.
lot of times people like that didn't ask for that.
Right. And then also the public thing is interesting because everything you say is like something, right? And it's like you're just trying to do some work. People asking you for help for things. I don't really know that much more than other people. It's like not that shouldn't be that different. And it almost like hurts you in a way where people think, oh, you're the Babel guy or whatever, then that means you know what's going on when I don't, or that they don't need to contribute because they're not good enough or they don't have enough knowledge when I was in the same position, just had more time. And then it's like finding the time to mentor people is like also more work, it's like you want to do all these things too, but it's hard because there's like people that don't know a lot about open source in general and then helping them, or people that want to get involved in open source, but then they just don't have that much experience. And then each of those things is a little like in the end is basically draining because you're trying to like deal with the project and then the overall ecosystem and then helping new people and then if you quit your job you're trying to make money, and so it's like all those things at once might be a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
tiring hearing. I'm tired hearing about it. I'm just like, oh my god, this is overwhelming hearing about this.
Right, and then all you're doing is talking about it all day too, so it's like, yeah, it can be. And then, oh yeah, and then it's like this gets into like, well, what does it look like to like have a work schedule, and like how often are you working on this thing? Is it all like 8 hours, or is it all the time? Is it on a weekend? When do you take a vacation? At least at work it's easy because you're like, oh, I'm taking a vacation, all right, bye. But then open source, it's like people are asking you for help all the time. I mean, you're gonna tell people like, I'm not gonna be here for 2 weeks, and then what if that person that asked for help, they had no context into who you are or anything? They're like, oh, they seem like a welcoming community, and we say that we are, but we can't when you're like, oh, I just want to like not do this right now or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, do you have a sense of do you have role models for who people who've navigated this successfully that you kind of think, oh, I want to kind of get to that point, or does that not exist because it's everyone is scrambling like you are?
I don't know if there are, like, I guess it's just people that have been doing it for a long time, right? I don't know if particular examples, and you don't know because like it just perceived that way, right? Like it looks like they're doing well, and it's funny. I bet like there's a lot of people that think I'm doing that because they see what I'm saying online or whatever, and
Right,
they
right.
think like, wow, Henry, you're like super patient and like all those
Until
things.
they see this podcast.
Right, and then they listen to the podcast, right? So, and maybe that's just because I'm feeling that right now, but no, but I understand this is also like part of what it's like. And also I did opt into this, like especially now that I've left my job. It's like I know this is part of it. It's just, and I know there are parts that are gonna suck, or there are parts where you have no idea what you're doing, or you feel like everything is kind of not going well. That's part of even just being like independent, I guess, where you're not doing what other people tell you, and then the freedom is almost limiting, right? Freedom is almost, there's too many choices, there's too many options. You want guidance when you're the one supposed to do the guidance. Yeah.
And do you talk to, is there like a cohort of other people like yourself that you all commiserate with, behind the scenes?
Uh, well, I guess it's just people in our group, and then in a greater community, there is a on GitHub. There's like a maintainers like repo, where other maintainers can talk to each other. But it's more like kind of one off, or it's not. I think this is one of the problems I had recently, where I'm almost to the point now where I'm like, I don't really want to talk to people digitally anymore. It's like I'm only getting value, not value, just like feeling drained other than just talking to people like face to face or like through video chat or something. Doing it through, Twitter and GitHub is
Yeah,
just not,
text is a different beast.
not
Yeah.
helping me. And then thinking about like the physical world, it's like I've been playing a lot more. I've been trying to like deal with stress in terms of, getting exercise. And so one thing
Yeah.
I've been doing is ping pong. And like someone visited from SF, and we were playing in my area, and then like this random older dad was, he was playing too, and he was watching. He's like, "Hey, can we play?" And it was cool, just like meeting people through like sports. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I was like, and it hasn't happened in a while. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And like, he like even gave me his number because he's like staying for this week to visit his daughter. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. So I like messaged him, hey, we can play here or something. It's just like, wow, it's like building connection, and not just like the playing, but like learning about what their life's about, and same here and stuff like that. It's like so much better than
You
just
tell them about Babel. You tell them your whole story, and they're like, "What the hell is this?"
yeah. And like it has nothing, and it's just totally different from someone making an issue on GitHub where like they have no idea who you are. They just assume that you're there 24/7, that you can help them, or there's a certain kind of expectation that's implicit in the way that it works now, which is not healthy for anyone, right? And it's a cultural change that we have to do. And maybe the fact that I'm still doing it, or we're answering within X minutes, is just reinforcing that culture.
Yeah,
It's like,
reinforcing
why
the
are we?
behavior.
Yeah, the behavior that we're doing now, and we're not like thinking about that. We're just kind of like, oh, I have to look at every single issue. I have to work on this every day. I have to do all this stuff. It's like, no, I don't have to.
Yeah,
And
and
like,
that reminds me kind of, as thinking about user interfaces, like what if you had a Chrome extension for GitHub that would delay your messages or see reminders saying, look, I think they had this on course forums and also on Gmail, right? There's these plugins that kind of force you to slow down and say, like, we'll batch up your mail once a day or once every 3 hours, and you explicitly have to ask for it. And it's not like a, push notification is the biggest problem, right? It's like, oh, wow, we have these push notifications. And instead, it batches up, and like it, thinking about kind of how to use technology to help us slow down or be more thoughtful and deliberate about stuff could be,
right. No, totally. I totally would love that. It's like we're focusing for engagement and usage and time, but it's like we need to get rid of that. It's like, yeah, push notification, turn all those off, batch everything up, because the problem is doing it all the time throughout the day is the draining part. Like 24/7, there's something going on when you can't even focus anymore. You don't even know, like, and everyone thinks their thing is the most important thing, and then at the end, you don't even know. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. It's like, what is going on? Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is something that is this yeah, and it gets back to like, if you are, I talked to Nadia Egbal about this too. It's like there's this rise of people who are kind of thrown into the public eye who are just normal people, right? So it's like, if you're Brad Pitt or, Oprah, or whatever, if you're a mega celebrity, you kind of know that's the lifestyle, right? Like you're going to get bombarded by paparazzi. You're going to have people write about you in the tabloids. You're going to do news interviews all the time. You're just in the public eye, and you kind of get used to somehow you get used to this sort of celebrity lifestyle. But like for a lot of people working, say, on open source, like you get bombarded with a lot of things in the public, and it's like people are well-meaning, right? It's not like people are, for the most part, people are well-meaning, but like that's just not what you were, you had a job, as a developer or as an engineer and stuff. Like that's just not part of the job description.
Right. Like this whole, it's like DevRel and all that stuff. But it's like maybe you might like that, but then doing open source, you have to do all of those things. So it's not like you're only doing DevRel or you're only doing engineering. You're doing literally everything, especially because there's not that many people. Yeah, it is weird, and it's like, how do we kind of cut back on those kinds of things where it's like it's just an assumption now. Like it just seems like a lot of the issues are like they kind of creeped up, but then we don't actually understand it until it's like not too late, but like you're like, oh wow, this is a big deal, a big problem.
Yeah, and my other kind of anecdote on here, my folk psychology hat, is that like I feel like the people who step up to do this kind of stuff are people like yourself. Like they're generally nice people, right? People who want to be helpful. Because otherwise, like if you're, if you're someone who's just in it for the money, or like, really lazy or selfish or unhelpful, you wouldn't be, or you, not just you, but people in general, they wouldn't be in these positions of maintaining open source or Wikipedia or community projects, right? It's like it attracts people who want to be altruistic and helpful and obliged for others and stuff. But then that makes it even harder, because then, people bombard you with all these requests. So
Right. And those are the kind of people that will continue to stay until they get burnt out, probably. So
Yeah, and it's like a hard thing. I mean, it's like just personally myself, I've like I've kept an eye on a lot of stuff, and I'm like, I would not personally want to. I'm not that nice of a person, but I would not want to do this sort of stuff.
yeah, or maybe I haven't realized that yet. It's like, oh, at some point, like, okay, I'm never doing this. Maybe it's easy to for that to really change over time, where you kind of like over time, you're like, oh, I can't do it in the same way as before when you first started.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think the sustainability is key, and I think that kind of setting up the sustainable practices is that like you know a lot of the work is in setting up initially, and then maintaining it may not be. So I mean, thinking about, I mean, I don't exactly, we don't know the details, but I'm just thinking just very much about just let's say people who create a programming language, so Larry Wall and Guido and the guy who did PHP, who I think is in Facebook. These folks have they mostly delegate a lot of that work now, and like
mm,
they're working full time back in whatever engineering organization they're working on at Facebook or Dropbox or wherever, and they go to meetings and they get emails, but they mostly delegated a lot of that out. So that may be one longer term thing I've seen for people who are big in open source, that they eventually or working in a quote unquote normal job as a senior engineer or something, and
right.
they spend part of their company time because they are a well-known figure. Their company knows they spend that time on the open source and maintaining and such.
Yeah, I guess that's only for that one person though. It's like,
Yeah,
how does that affect everyone else? It's like, well, everyone else is not even doing open source at work. So like, one thing is like, why aren't we doing more open source at work?
that's right. So systematically, right? So thinking about cultural change of, if maybe that's the only way to scale, right? That it's right now we're still in the stages where people have to scrounge around their own time and be the
Yeah,
one weird person at work who does this, like yourself and others. But if there's a culture of companies, maybe hopefully we'll see how Microsoft does with this GitHub acquisition, other companies of more systematically supporting open source in company structures and in incentives and in promotion and all that. Because once you have all this, if we live in a universe where this stuff is promoted by companies and it's valued and you get promoted by it and everything, then that nudges stuff toward the direction.
yeah, and same with like us trying to get more people involved in open source. It's like the assumption there might be like, oh, you gotta do it in your free time, and it's like either we pay people to work on it full time for those core people, or they can work on it at work, and that's more balanced than just like everyone full time. And even the money issue is there's a lot of problems with that too. Like how do we deal with that money? And just because it's really hard to deal with money doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it and we shouldn't put money in, for sure. Like, because a lot of people are kind of turned out like, oh, once we add money, it's going to change everything. It is going to change everything, but we need that. It's part of the solution.
Yeah, I totally agree that it's and it kind of goes. I mean, this is really hard too because like kind of this old school ethos of, because I've tracked this. I mean, I'm not super old, but like I've tracked a lot of this open source and free software stuff since somewhat of the early days, and like it is kind of this clash of like the people with very much principal values of kind of free software and stuff, and how we don't want corporate interests, and then on the other hand, there's a more pragmatic route is we need this to kind of go on. We can't just have people donating small amounts of money because it's not going to be enough to sustain at the scale we want. So I got to run pretty soon, but I want to give you the last, word or other kinds of things you want to tell the millions of fans who I'm sure are tuning in right now and will be later.
I don't know if I have anything particular to say. I don't know. I guess even though things aren't as they could be, I guess I'm interested in the space and trying to figure out what we can do. So not just from like the personal view and the project itself, but like at a systematic view too. And I just want to figure out how to do that, but through the project I'm working on. So like living that out in the project is probably the best way to like discover the problems and maybe learn about the solution too.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's, we often hear about, there are these kind of people who write thought pieces and kind of highfalutin things about, oh, what could we do and stuff. But I think the people who are on the ground, such as yourself on this angle, or people like Nadia who are really studying this and understanding the people who are behind this, those are, you all are the folks who are going to be affecting that change later on, because when you or Nadia or others in the community talk about this, you have that credibility of having done the on the ground work of understanding what the real issues are. And I'm hoping, I'm keeping an eye on this, as a beneficiary of this, all this stuff, I'm keeping an eye on it.
Yeah,
So,
I'm trying to work with her more, so it should be good.
awesome. Yeah, I'm building up this cabal of podcast alum that now you're roped into. All right, thank you so much, Aaron. I actually am trying to record 3 of them this morning in a batch because I haven't recorded any in months. So I got to get to my third 3 of 3 soon. So, all right, we'll go offline and chat for a bit. Thanks so much.
Thank you.